Okay.
We're live now, Chairman.
Thank you, Jonathan. Could I ask everybody first if they could turn their cameras off unless speaking, and if you'd be kind enough to pop yourself on mute, I would appreciate that. Thank you. So welcome to this Joint Waste Management Board, Wednesday the 17th of March 2021. Do we have any apologies?
Excuse me, Chair, I've just had a message from Paul Farrer. He's trying to get in, but he's unable to get into the meeting.
Have apologies, Chairman, from Trevor Johnson from Newcastle Borough Council.
Okay, thank you.
Apologies, Chair, from Councillor Chesworth. I don't think he's going to be able to make it. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We have more than three members here, so we're quorum anyway. So item 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd December 2020. Do we take those as a true and accurate record? Do I have a proposer on those, please?
I'll second it, Chairman.
Thank you. Is that proposed by Richard?
Yes,
Cox?
yes, it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Julia. So item number 4 is the matters arising. I think there's something in there, Julia, that you wanted to raise, which was the terms of reference and the proposed review.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, this was discussed very, very briefly at the last meeting, and thank you for allowing it to come on this meeting. This is more about how we take forward not only a joint waste management approach, but also using that model for taking forward a joint approach on climate change. Not only through the workshops that I think most authorities representatives attended, run by Keele University. Out of that, and also out of my discussions with a number of local authority cabinet members, is that there does need to be a more joined up approach to how we tackle climate change. We're all beavering away on our own agendas, but there needs to be some sharing of good ideas, sharing of what we're doing, so that actually we've got a more coordinated approach. And this was just a suggestion of a way forward. And if I can thank Tim Cooper for putting together what I call a starter for 10. It's only a draft terms of reference. There may be different ways of approaching this. One joint committee with 2 different parts of the agenda, 2 separate committees. But it's to start that discussion about how, as a collective set of local authority organisations, we can take this climate change agenda forward. And of course, I would remind members that waste management and the services that we provide are actually a big source of carbon dioxide. And actually, it's one of the areas that we all need to work together to minimise that carbon footprint. So it is a starter for 10. My suggestion is, if the local authority partners can take it away, discuss it with their teams, let Tim Cooper know what their views are, so that perhaps this could be taken forward a little bit more at the next meeting, which I think will probably be June, and it can then be discussed, if appropriate, at leaders and chief executives. But I think it's just starting the discussion about how we, as local authority partners, can work together in the most efficient way. And the Joint Waste Management Board has proved in the past to be very effective. I appreciate that there aren't always common cabinet members, common lead officers, but I think there is a way of managing that. But I think if members could, have a think about what their views are on this, to see if there's a common way forward. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Jessel. Tim Cooper, is there anything that you wished to add to that?
No, not at all. Obviously, there's as Julia said, there's the draft terms of reference have gone round. There was a couple of different versions because obviously, if we do decide to keep them as two separate meetings, there'd obviously have to be a slightly reworked version. But yeah, as Julia says, if anybody's got any comments, they want to bring them across to me, send them across to me. I can always try and include them into the terms of reference. Not a problem.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's basically take away, speak to your relevant authorities, have a read through it, and obviously feedback to Tim, Julia, or myself with any of your ideas. Jonathan, if we were to take something forward at the next meeting, what is the procedure? Because obviously we are not a decision-making body. We can only discuss these items. I wondered if you could give me a bit of clarity around that, please. Are you with us, Jonathan?
Sorry, Chairman, I was on mute. Apologies. Yes, ordinarily, any substantial change to the terms of reference would have to be approved by the SLGA executive body. But unfortunately, that hasn't met in a number of years. So all I can suggest is that any change that you want to make that's agreed between partners carries the support of the leaders and chief executives as well. I think there's an expectation that member representatives on the board have decision-making powers. So, you know, it really needs to be blessed by leaders and chief execs. Hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you very much. If we could therefore take this away and come back with some conclusions at our next meeting. When did we say that would possibly be, Kay?
Our meetings are usually once every 3 months. Myself and Julia already have a plan to go to chief execs and leaders with regards to the MERV project on the 8th of July. So it might be beneficial if our next meeting of Joint Waste Board was just before that, so that Julia and myself could take any alterations of the terms of reference to the same meeting while we're there.
Okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense, and that's an agreement. Is there anything else that we've got arising from the minutes of the 2nd of December, or is that the only item, Kay?
That's the only item as far as I'm aware.
Okay, thank you very much. So item number 5, the summary progress report, and this is the report of the Waste Partnership Manager.
Thank you, Chair. This is a table which you will find in your agenda pack. It is the usual information that we submit quarterly. So this time it includes quarter 2, which is the summer period. We do have quarter 3 data, but it hasn't yet been verified by Waste Data Flow. From the report, you can see that in quarter 1 it was affected by the lockdown period. By quarter 2, people were starting to, I wouldn't say resume normal life because we're still not there yet, but it was less of a lockdown throughout the summer, and that is reflected in the figures. Indeed, tonnage levels are still high to this date, but they are slowly returning to normal levels. In many places it is with all streams. We've also seen quite a lot of additional garden waste. I think people being stuck at home means that they are more focused on their garden than they would normally be. There's nothing else to do, so they're focusing on house and garden jobs. Are there any questions on any of the stats in the table? No, then that's it from me, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Kay. So on to item number 6, the consultations update, and that's the oral report of the Head of Recycling and Fleet Services, Newcastle under Lyme Borough Council. And is that Andrew Bird?
It is, thank you, Chair.
Hello, Andrew.
Hello. Yes, not a lot to say. We were dearly hoping that, and I think one of the reasons for setting the date of this meeting this week was that we had hoped that the consultations would be out. However, there is no sign of them. We thought they would materialise last week, didn't. Thought again they would materialise this week, and haven't. My understanding is that they, I suppose, a bit like our various council reports, don't just go from the one department. They have to get verified by the likes of Treasury and other departments. And there's I think there's a feeling that that's where it is in the process at the moment, awaiting sign off from other government departments that clearly have a vested interest in the 4 consultations that will be coming out. So we can only hope that they materialise very soon, because obviously we go into PERDA fairly quickly in the next couple of weeks, in which case if they haven't come out before then, it's unlikely that we will see them until sometime in May, which will be really disappointing. Likewise, the Environment Bill, of which all of these resource and waste strategy elements sit behind, has also not gone through the full parliamentary process yet, and has been delayed. So again, that's a little bit frustrating. So that's really where we're at, unfortunately. I'd hoped that we might have been able to have a bigger debate about this, but sadly we can't. What I would say is that I think we're fairly certain that the consultations probably won't answer many of the questions that we had thought that they would, and will probably pose others. So I think from the first round of consultations, we thought that things like proposals for free garden waste to be provided nationally would have disappeared. That's possibly unlikely. So that might be a question that we get again. And obviously there's a fair number of us now that do charge for garden waste and have introduced those services even since the first round of consultations. The second one is around mandatory food waste and the timing of that, because again, if that's the mandatory bit is probably, you know, is what it is, but the timing is everything. And if again there is a requirement to have that in by 2025, that is going to be incredibly difficult, I would suggest, to achieve with procurement, infrastructure and everything else. So I think there's some things that as a board, we're as an officer group and then the Joint Waste Management Board are really going to have to focus heavily on these consultations when they do come out, to make sure that, you know, we give really good and thorough feedback to government on our thoughts. And that's really all that I can say at the moment. Unfortunately, as I said, I'd hoped we'd have something on the table to be able to at least share some headlines of, but that's as much as we know at the moment. We're happy to take any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Just to clarify, I think PERD is in 5 days. It's on the 22nd. Kay?
Thank you, Chair. Just further to what Andrew has said, when we did the first round of consultations, it was again pushed back, and I'd like to thank South staffs who led on a joint response, because I was actually on maternity leave. Bad timing. This time, I won't be on maternity leave. That we usually get a 12-week consultation period. Within that 12 weeks, what we're looking to do is run a joint response as a partnership from all 10 authorities within Staffordshire. Obviously, authorities are completely entitled to their own response as well, or if you prefer, you can opt out of the partnership response if you so choose. I will be working with officers to develop a joint response. I will collate all the information draft a response on behalf of us all, and once that's been signed off at officer level, I will send that round Joint Waste Board, either at a meeting, or if the timelines don't work out with meeting dates and the consultation end dates, then I will do it via email to get member sign off before I send it out. Hope that's all right with everyone. That's just a basic plan at the moment. If anyone has any problems with that or would like any more information, feel free to let me know. But that will begin as soon as possible when the consultations do come out. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Faulkner. Are you with us? We're having some technical difficulties. Okay, while I wait for Ray.
Is that better? Can you hear me now?
Much, much better.
In relation to the strategic waste review that we deferred last year, is there any action we need to take to ensure that we are meeting with our strategic obligations? Do we have to actually go through a motion of deferring it again, or are we happy with the original motion that we had last year?
I think that's a really good question. I think from my point of view, I would say that we're probably okay with the motion that we set out last year, which was effectively to defer until we got a clearer picture on government's thinking. I still think that stands. Whether once we start going through the consultations, that opinion changes, and it may do. I think that's at the point where, and it will probably, again, hoping that they come out imminently, whether at the next board meeting or the one after, we may well have to bring some other recommendations. But let's see what the consultations actually say. I would suggest first. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Tim Cooper.
Yeah, just to add to Andrew's point there, I led on the letter that got exchanged with DEFRA in regard to our Earth strategy, and I'd have to check, but I'm pretty certain the reason we gave for not updating ours was we're still waiting on their strategy to be finalised. So it kind of fits that, as there still hasn't been finalised, it would still be running on our old one. But what I will check with our transactor with DEFRA just to make sure that that's the case, and make sure he'd be happy to for that opinion to go forwards, just so we don't need to draft another letter for DEFRA.
That's really important, and I appreciate that, Tim. That would be really useful. And a question I have myself, and I should really know the answer, Andrew. How many of our authorities are currently doing food waste, and what do you think will happen going forward? Do you think that's something that will end up being mandatory?
That's a really good question again. In terms of the numbers, there's only my authority that actually collects it separately. We have done so for the last 10 years. I think the answer to the other part of your question is yes, it will be mandatory, undoubtedly. I think that's fairly clear, and I think actually the Environment Bill will set that out. The question, as I posed before, is really one around timing. And also, I think the question around cost, because the investment that will be required for authorities not currently doing it is fairly significant, and we all know the financial situation that we've been in for the last decade, and no doubt will continue to be in. So the other side of it really is assurance that we will get. There will be funding available for authorities to actually implement these services under the new burdens funding, and DEFRA have consistently said that there will be, but again the proof is in the pudding, isn't it, to ensure that it is. But again, I think when we are responding to the consultations, that's got to be a clear message that goes back to government. And for my authority that is already doing it, I think there will be a clear message going back to saying, well, hang on a minute, we've done it for the last 10 years. We feel we should probably get something as well.
No, that's fully understood. Just before I pass on to Councillor Newbury, how is it disposed of?
Okay, ours is disposed of through anaerobic digestion. It's actually the Biffa AD plant down at Poplars where ours goes to. Originally it went to an on-farm AD plant near Nosal. We were there for the first 7 years, and then Biffa won the contract in 2016, so it now goes to them. We're just for information, we actually suspended the food waste service last year because of COVID when we swapped from our source separated recycling system. We physically haven't got enough people to actually man the vehicles, so we actually suspended it for a couple of months and then restarted in August. And you'll notice on the performance figures that we've just looked at, you can see that dip in our figures there. We're just about to have another big push on it actually, so in the next month, because we want to get the participation back up effectively, and indeed the tonnage. But it's hard work. We've set an aspiration of 50% participation, and if you think about it, that's actually really quite poor, as you could argue, as an aspiration. But we're probably at something like between 20 and 25% participation at the moment. So it's a really difficult thing to get householders to do. It really is, and obviously we'll be more than happy to share our knowledge with partners as we go forward in terms of them having to implement these services, but they are quite difficult to operate and they are costly.
Thank you, Andrew. That's really useful as well that you as an authority within our collective group actually have experience and some long experience in doing this as well. So we've got that to fall back on. So that's really, really useful. Councillor Newbury.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I very much agree with what you just said, and it's an interesting discussion on this one. I just had a few kind of quick supplementary questions, if I may. The first is, do we have any sense of what will happen to the authorities that currently collect food waste mixed with garden waste? This is something Cannock Chase used to do. Obviously, I think South Staffs and Stoke-on-Trent do it currently. Sorry, not South Staffs, Staffs Moorlands. The second question is just around capacity. It just strikes me that if all local authorities in England are going to be forced to, bring in a segregated food waste service potentially in a very short space of time, how is there going to be the capacity within the sector to actually meet that demand? And the third thing that's just come to me when you were speaking then, Andrew, was what do you think we're going to be able to do really to encourage households to actually engage with this? Because if we're forced to deliver it and then we have very low uptake rates, that's obviously going to be a big cost for us. So, is there any proposals for any kind of, I know in Belfast, they've actually told households, if you put food waste in your black bin, we will not collect it and we'll withdraw your service. Obviously, we don't have the power to do that at the moment. Is there any kind of talk of that coming in to help us encourage uptake at all?
Okay, yeah, really good point. So in terms of food waste mixed with garden waste, I think that will be acceptable for a period of time. But I think there will probably be a move towards separating it effectively, because it effectively has to be processed through in-vessel composting process, which is actually quite expensive in its own right, and actually has no material gain in terms of energy, which anaerobic digestion does. So it's not a particularly good for these days type of process, but it's clear that that will take time to make its way through, and I think government have accepted that. But again, it will be interesting to see in the consultations whether there's any indication of a sort of time scale on that. In terms of capacity of anaerobic digestion, really good point. At the moment, there's massive overcapacity. There was loads of plants that were being built, 5 years ago, massive overcapacity. As this is a public meeting, I don't want to say what our gate fee is at Cannock, but it's extremely low, and it's just as well because the collection costs are actually quite high. So So that you've got plants absolutely fighting for material at the moment, and I've even heard of some authorities being potentially paid for food waste coming in. But that's where we are now. You're quite right. When it becomes mandatory and you've got 400 odd authorities across the country needing facilities, that becomes a different ball game altogether, and that will pose a problem, and it will pose a problem in terms of gate fees, and it's one I'm battling with at the moment in terms of what do I do with my contract. Do I extend? Do I go out again and try and get a really low price before the rush hits, so to speak? So capacity is going to be a massive issue. And I think, again, this is where the timing and implementation of this is really important. And it goes beyond that, because it's also around procurement of vehicles. You know, we bought a fleet of separate vehicles this year, and, you know, even they took 6 months to build. So you can imagine, again, with everybody going, that's going to increase as well. So that's another thing. So we really need to understand the timing and implementation of this. And I would suggest that you're looking at a minimum of 5 to 10 years, I would think, before you'll get coverage across the country with every collection authority. That's my gut feeling. And in terms of pushing for increasing participation, yeah, really good point. I'd seen the Northern Ireland thing, and it's really interesting. Wales have pushed it through, basically reducing residual waste frequencies, so down to 3 and 4 weekly collections. And again, that is a difficult political decision that would have to be made, but clearly by reducing capacity in the residual waste stream forces people to think about, you know, doing things and separating things more, and that's where you get the uptake in food waste. So those they're quite blunt instruments, but those are the ones that I suppose in a way have to force people to do it. One of the things we found was that we increased participation by giving free caddy liners, so that helped. And as part of our big push coming forward, we are actually going to stick at every refuse bin to say no food waste, please. Now we can't. You're quite right. We can't enforce it, but we're hoping that will give a bit of a clear message, and some might potentially take it as it's a ban, even though, as I say, we can't enforce it, to try and again encourage people to use the service that's provided, which is a real difficult one. Hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. That's a really comprehensive answer. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Chairman. In the event, obviously, an increase in waste, food waste and anaerobic digestion, would it be an assumption to believe that there will have to be more, if we term it, factory units being created? Because there's always unintended consequences to whatever's been decided, and one of those is that these anaerobic digestion units pop up. In fact, there's one an application in Lichfield due to be heard at some point. The infrastructure of rural Staffordshire is not equipped whatsoever to have these farms that are suddenly diversifying down single lane country lanes for anaerobic digestion units. Do we foresee that is going to be an occurrence, that we're going to see more applications coming forward because of the demand of how to deal with food waste and where to send it? Or are we looking at the 4 ashes, for example, for Staffordshire, it would suffice? But of course, my argument would be if you're increasing more, then you're going to have more, you've got to have more outlets. Is that something that's being looked at?
I would think that would probably need to form part of the waste local plan. Obviously, county colleagues will have more information really around that. But you're absolutely right. The demand for these facilities will undoubtedly go up. I can't envisage, certainly when we were using the on-farm AD plant that was near Nosal near Stafford, we didn't actually take the food waste direct to the AD plant. It went via a transfer station. So in terms of vehicle movements, it can be managed that way. But undoubtedly, as I say, yes, you will find that there are going to have to be more AD plants that are required. But again, something else, that technology is actually moving quite quickly as well on this side of things. And you may find that we see a lot smaller units, potentially even in more urban areas, because they're able to satisfy the sort of environmental impacts that way. So there's an awful lot of different things going on, really, which and again, it's going to be a little bit of chicken and egg. They won't come until we've got legislation to say you've got to do it, and then and then we just need to be careful that we don't go along the line as I think you're pointing out, to get unintended consequences effectively. So that yeah, quite right, something we need to be very careful about. And in terms of writing our own joint municipal waste strategy for Staffordshire, that's one of the key points that maybe we need to really factor in as we develop that document going forward.
Thanks, Andrew. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Kay.
Thank you, Chair. Just a comment, really. Food waste is a strange material stream in that most of it is entirely avoidable. So in terms of education campaigns, we have previously been focusing on sort of the reuse aspect of using your leftovers. Can you put it in the freezer instead of throwing it in the bin? Can you be more organised with your food storage? Can you be more organised with your food shopping? So in terms of education, and certainly I'm aware of food and nutrition education that happens in schools, that is the angle that is happening, which is wonderful. So ideally, we would never have to collect food waste because it's all being reused within its own system. Or indeed home composting. That is something else that we need to consider. Ideally, the only food waste that we would collect would be things that aren't reusable, like eggshells, tea bags, for example. So it's a strange waste stream in that, in the hope of, once people realise how much food they are wasting, when they're putting it in their caddy, they can see the volume. Actually, we've wasted a lot of food, that's costing us a lot of money. They would hopefully reduce the amount that they are wasting by being more savvy with their shopping, by reusing more of their leftovers, which would actually reduce the waste stream, which would mean we would collect less, but it's actually more beneficial in the first place. So it's a strange waste stream to consider. So just to make you aware of that, and that will be reflected in any communications. But I fully expect that we will have a dedicated food section within our strategy when we do get to drafting it.
Thank you. Councillor Jessel, I know you did have your hand up earlier, but then you put it back down again. I wondered, is this something that could possibly fall within our sustainability or joint sustainability board as well?
Yes, it certainly could do. I was going to ask the question that actually Councillor Newbury asked, because East Staffordshire, when Andrew Bird, I was the cabinet member and Andrew was the lead officer, we actually had a food waste was collected with the green waste, and actually that was a pretty efficient way of dealing with food waste, both in terms of residents' participation. It was easy to understand, and of course I'm always concerned that there, in all these recycling, there's two sides to the equation, and you've got to make sure that the collection and disposal doesn't generate as much or more CO2 than if you deal with it as we do at the moment, or as a joint green waste. I think we do need to look at the future. I think the points Kay has made are very, very relevant, that if we're not careful, we will be putting systems in place that become redundant, pretty well redundant in a few years' time. I think we do need to look at this. We need to look at how efficient we are at collecting it, making sure we reduce CO2 emissions using efficient vehicles, but equally that we're not having to transport the material that we collect out of county or all over the country. It's a bigger issue. I'm not sure on food waste. I think it's a short-term issue. If we educate people properly, we should minimise the food waste. I remember years ago they used to say it was about £480 per household in money is wasted. That's a hell of a lot of housekeeping money. Equally, you know, there's some food waste like the outside leaves of cabbages and potato peelings, which I still think could go in the brown waste and the green waste that we collect. I compost it at home. I'm fortunate I've got the room to have 3 compost bins and room to dig it into flower beds afterwards. Not everybody has that facility. You know, you have a small garden and have a compost bin, you're often a bit strapped as to what you're going to do with the compost afterwards. So I think we need to, you know, look at this in the practical terms. At the end of the day, it's only as successful as the buy-in from our customers who are the residents.
Yeah, thank you for that. I have a partner that is constantly educating me that just because it says best buy, I should still be able to eat it 3 weeks later. Neither of us has won that debate yet. But Kay, was that a historic hand or did you want to come back?
No, just another point I've just thought of actually. And Tim at the County Council might be able to clarify this. But just something that we need to be aware of, that the waste that goes into our incinerators is burnt, obviously, and that the efficiency of that depends on the calorific value. And the food waste provides quite a lot of that calorific value. I believe there are not necessarily targets, but requirements. Tim might be able to clarify this within the contract as to how that helps with burning. So there are knock-on effects as if we take food waste out of our residual waste. It's not just as simple as we collect it elsewhere and have a separate contract. It will have knock-on effects at our existing facilities. Tim, have you got any clarification on that?
CV value, calorific value, does play a factor into the ERFs. It is more a factor at Hamford, the Stoke plant, where there is actually bans around CV. Food waste, while will affect it, I think it's more the plastic content which will have the bigger effect, because obviously that's got more of the oil-based products. W2R, the larger of the 2 facilities, doesn't really have that constraints on it. The in-feed material is down to Veolia to manage to make sure that it meets the calorific value it needs to generate the energy. It is an interesting point though that you raised, Kay, in terms of the plants we've got in Staffordshire, and it was something that got raised with at one of the WIDIT meetings. In all this drive to remove food waste from the residual waste and put it through AD plants and processes, all they're doing is trying to generate energy from that food waste. If you've got an efficient EOF like we have, you're kind of already doing that, and effectively you're putting more resources into doing something that's already being done. So there is a question around that, and I'm yet to see what sort of DEFRA come back with when you in them sort of on that sort of argument. But I think just to sort of support you in what you've said, Kay, I think the first line of defence in terms of food waste is to try and reduce it being generated at the home as much as we can. We do a free compost giveaway where we have compost giveaways. We support compost giveaways, trying to get people composting this food waste at home and things like that. And I think there's other techniques we can try and deploy, and certainly things we need to investigate in the coming years to try and drive down food waste.
Tim, would it affect our tonnage levels in terms of our requirements going into 4 Ashers? Obviously, we have threshold values that we need to hit. Obviously, I'm assuming we throw in quite a lot of food waste at the moment. Were that to magically all disappear overnight and go elsewhere, would that affect the plant as well?
No, we have, I think from memory, don't quote me on this, but I think we take around 30,000 tonnes of food waste into both of our plants at the minute. So if we manage to remove food waste either through collections or reducing it being generated in the first place, we could lose up to 30,000 tonnes. In reality, that's unlikely to happen to achieve those levels, because people will always put some sort of food waste in the bin anyway. In reality, both of the contracts would be able to cope with a loss of food waste to that sort of tonnage, but it would probably make it more. It will make us more efficient in other areas. So I wouldn't say, although I've said it, we have got an efficient system already. If we were to set up our own food waste collections and remove it, it would probably, the plants wouldn't have a problem. And to be fair, losing 30,000 tonnes of our waste going into the plants would probably be a good thing in reality. So that's not a problem.
Thank you.
It's a really interesting point as well about collecting food waste actually might encourage bad habits, which is or support habit of food waste. So that's really interesting. Andrew, just one last question before we wrap this particular item up. Have you, obviously there's lessons learned with putting this in place. Is there any particular pitfall that you came across whilst delivering this and what was that, or has it been fairly smooth?
I think it's been fairly smooth, effectively. I think initially the biggest one for us was around liners, so we didn't used to provide them, and I think that was where we got loads of complaints and loads of reasons why people wouldn't partake in it. They see it as actually quite a dirty operation, having a caddy in a kitchen and then having to decant it into another one, and so the process is difficult, and I think that's the biggest challenge. So you've really got to try and make it as easy as possible. And I think the point that Kay makes as well is that actually, it was interesting that we saw our participation rate increase, but actually the tonnage stayed fairly static. And I think that comes back to the point around people seeing actually when it is separate, how much they are actually wasting, and therefore they do change their habits. And I think that's a really interesting lesson, and that's something that we would need to build in, I think, going forward.
Thank you, Andrew. I've got, apologies, I saw two hands. I've got Councillor Newbury.
Just wanted to ask a really quick follow-up on that. How much does that cost you then, Andrew, to provide those liners? Does that kind of affect the kind of cost-benefit ratio hugely?
Yeah, we probably spend around £25,000 a year on food waste liners. They're not cheap. We go for plastic liners, I'll say as well, not biodegradable ones, and the reason for that is that the AD plant don't want biodegradable ones, because actually the food sticks to the plastic and they can't get it off, and then it all goes through the process. Whereas if it's plastic, it goes through a washing plant and they're able to get it off, and the plastic comes out pretty clean, and they can get that recycled. But yes, it's a costly service to provide. It really is. It costs us. It's about £500,000 for us on our service overall. Which if we didn't do it, it wouldn't necessarily. We wouldn't have to spend that money. But members here have been committed to it all the way through. We did a review 2 years ago when we were looking at developing our new recycling service, and they chose that they wanted to keep it. So we do have it, and that was my point about. I think we'll be quite upset if we see new burdens funding. We accept that has to go in, but actually I think we'll be looking for something from government to say, well, actually, they appreciate that there are authorities that have basically stomached this for a long time and taken the burden on, but actually should be probably rewarded for that. So yeah, hopefully that helps.
Thank you very much. Councillor Edwards.
Thanks, Chair. Interesting what Andrew's just said regarding the biodegradable bags. I've spent a bit of time in Austria over the past few years, and it's standard procedure in certainly in the Tyrol area where I've been. Food waste is just standard procedure. I think the bins are probably emptied once every either fortnight or even monthly, potentially, and it's just common practice for the residents there. And yes, they do use biodegradable bags. So I wonder if anyone from, I'm not suggesting any from this forum go off and speak to the Austrians and see how they do it, but surely somebody from Westminster will have been talking to our European colleagues to see how they do it, surely.
Thank you. That's a really important point. Andrew, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, there has gone an awful lot of research on, and actually, you know, closer to home, Wales have probably been doing this for a number of years. It's part of their blueprint for waste recycling and waste services. Food waste plays a major part in that. So Welsh authorities were mandated to collect food waste separately a number of years ago. And indeed, it works very well there. So, you know, we've got evidence actually very close to home, as well as in Europe. But yes, certainly I'm aware that the DEFRA do take a keen interest in you know, other countries' waste and recycling operations. So that is known.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm going to wrap that item up, but that's a really good discussion, and I appreciate that. And if any member, obviously, or officer wants to talk to Andrew and get some information around how they've implemented this service, then obviously I'm sure Andrew will be more than happy for you to do that. Thank you. I'm going to move on to item 7, which is exclusion of the public. The chairman to move that the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business, which involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in the paragraphs of Part 1 of Schedule 12A, as amended, of the Local Government Act 1972, indicated below. And if Jonathan, you could let me know when we can carry on, please.